Hello everyone, this is Andrew. Welcome to Keen on America.
On July 4th, 2026, America will be 250 years old. An anniversary that will, no doubt, be greeted with a mixture of celebration, contemplation, and resignation. In Keen on America, Andrew talks not just about the American past and present, but also speculates on its future. What, Andrew asks, will be the 21st century fate of this now venerable American Republic?
Hello everybody. One of the questions that many people are asking is why aren't men reading books anymore? All sorts of articles about that. The Guardian asks, have men really stopped reading? Seems as if everybody has, but particularly men. Vox asks whether men's reading habits are a national crisis. There are so many national crises in the United States, and I'm not sure we want to add men's reading habits. Lots of pieces about why men should read. The Atlantic had a piece about why men should read fiction. The real reason men should read fiction. Maybe the headline should be the reason real men should read fiction, whatever a real man is. New York Times, which tends to worry about everything, suggests that the disappearance of literary men should worry everyone. And the New York Times also asks in a letter, where have all the novel-reading men gone? My theory, maybe half seriously, is men have stopped reading because too many books have titles like What is Wrong with Men by Jessa Crispin, a woman who came on the show. We had a very interesting conversation, but I thought to ask the question of whether it really is a national crisis, whether men really have stopped reading, we should ask our resident literary expert. She's a woman, but she's an expert on men too, Bethanne Patrick. She's the book critic of the Los Angeles Times and has been doing some thinking and reading about men and books. So Bethanne, as always, a real honor and pleasure to have you back. I know that you've read Jessa Crispin's book, What is Wrong with Men. Is it is the title what the book is about, or is that slightly tongue-in-cheek?
I think it's slightly tongue-in-cheek. Jessa is one of the smartest people I know in the book and literary world. And so this book actually dives deep into what's not wrong with men and how men have been depicted in the media and what's changed for men as the idea of the patriarchy has changed. And what I love about this book, What is Wrong with Men, and she uses Michael Douglas as the sort of through line, which is both funny but stunningly accurate.
Right, it's the Wall Street version of Michael Douglas.
Exactly, the Gordon Gekko, but also the Fatal Attraction, Michael Douglas, the Michael Douglas who has shown us so many ways in which men can go off the rails and be really discombobulated by the world, if you will. That's what Crispin sees in Michael Douglas's 80s and 90s and early 2000 performances, that, you know, whether he's playing Bethanne or Gekko or whomever, he's really angry, his characters. And so this is not a book about Douglas qua Douglas. This is a book about how the roles Michael Douglas has chosen show us that it isn't just women who are prone to what we used to call hysteria, that men have something called neurasthenia that also affects them. And basically, when a man is becoming untethered from culture and society, he can really act out. And here's what I love about Crispin's book, and we'll talk about this more, I'm sure, as we go on, Andrew, but she finally gets at the layer that isn't spoken about enough, which is that the problem is what the patriarchy used to be, which was based on a man's role and responsibilities, not that all men, lived up to those, was taken away. She says it was replaced by something worse. And what she means by that is it was replaced by a system in which you just need to buy your way to the top. And of course, here we are in an era where we're seeing the one of the biggest symbols of the United States, the White House, covered in gold leaf. The Oval Office is being, gilded up the yin yang. And she says, look, this is a problem because how can men who aren't in the dominant class, who aren't in the educated class, who aren't in the financially privileged class, find a place for themselves? And so in talking about social class and in talking about finances and people who don't have the same resources, she gets at something I think very important that some of the other books and articles and media have not.
How much of this all, Bethanne, has to do with romance? There was an interesting op-ed in the Post a few weeks ago by Shadi Hamid. He has a new book coming out, not on this, but he's going to come on the show, about men's struggle for love. New York Times loves this sort of thing. I use the word love carefully.
Yes.
One piece in its Modern Love column asks where all the men have gone. Another asks why women are weary of the emotional keeper, the emotional labor of man keeping, whatever that is. And another piece asks not only where have all the men gone, but please come back. So is this, and we'll come on to some other books.
Yes.
One by Andrew Lipstein has also been on the show. But does Jessica Crispin suggest that it's not so much what is wrong with men, but what is wrong with the relationship between men and women? Is that at the core of this?
Well, I think that's a good question to ask, but it doesn't go far enough, because here's part of the problem. I was speaking with one of a grad student of mine recently.
Male or female?
Actually,
or both, or neither.
Female, but LGBTQ identifying. And they were telling me that one of the problems publishing has is that it's just still gendering things, right? But the Gen Zs and the Generation Alpha that's coming, these are young people who really are not all that interested in whether someone is a woman or a man. They are getting queerer quicker. And as far as I'm concerned, that is great, because it means that they're thinking. It means that they're making choices. It means that they're saying, this particular way of gendering something doesn't work for me.
Hold on, wait. I've already found the title for this conversation, Getting Queerer Quicker. What does that mean? And are you suggesting that intelligence results in getting queerer quicker? In other words, if you're not intelligent, you don't?
No. I mean, what I said, they're thinking. They are they're being intentional about the way they want to be seen in the world, the way they want to move in the world, the way they want to look at other people. They're not as interested in the binary of male versus female, man versus woman, as the boomers, Gen X, and even millennials are. And I thought, where are the books for that category? Where are the books for people who don't think, oh, romances are for women, thrillers are for men? Yes, of course, we've seen change, in the past decades in those categories, but not enough change. And I thought this is quite interesting, because getting queerer quicker, you're going to use that.
No, it's queerer quicker.
It's
GQQ.
GQQ. It is about changing minds and values individually. People are making decisions for themselves. They're not saying, I have to be this.
Although some critics might suggest that all this, certainly in generational terms, is basically just a new kind of orthodoxy. So in the old days, you got Michael Douglas, that
Right.
Jessa Crispin writes about. These days, you have the Michael Douglas, you have the orthodoxy, the conformity, to borrow some language from you, of getting queerer quicker.
I don't think anyone is saying anyone has to be this or that. I think if there really is a GQQ going on, again, it's because people are being intentional about who they want to be in the world. And this is important to what we're talking about in the crisis of masculinity, because for so long, the patriarchy meant how you can move through the world as a man. You put on your Hamburg hat, you go to the train station, you go to your job, you work all day, you come home maybe for dinner, or maybe you're going out for drinks, and then you get home when you want to. No one's going to expect dad to do anything dad doesn't want to do.
He's going to do the gardening, and he's going to make the barbecue, isn't he?
Yes.
And watch the sports on television.
Yes.
I want to get to some of your other books in a second, sure. Bethanne, because you've picked some good ones. But one book you didn't pick, and I'm intrigued with this, not because of the book, but because of its narrative in the publishing industry, is Richard Reeves has made a name for himself writing about the crisis of men and boys. And his best-selling book now, Of Boys and Men, Why the Modern Male is Struggling, Why It Matters, and What to Do About It, came out in 2022, has almost over 1,500 reviews, mostly positive, on Amazon. He's actually set up an institute now. He's become a major name. But we actually share an agent. And I know that book was incredibly hard to sell. In 2020, or maybe 2019, 2018, when the proposal went out, no traditional publisher wanted to touch it. And so in the end, he had to actually publish it with Brookings. And he was a fellow at Brookings, so it was an easy thing to do. And Brookings benefited, Reeves has benefited. But I wonder whether there is still some, certainly, hostility to the message about the crisis of men in traditional publishing.
Well, I think there is. Just to go into the industry of publishing for a quick second, sometimes you hear, oh, publishing is all women. Well, guess what? Publishing is a largely female industry when it comes to the bottom up to a certain level, but the C-suite people in publishing are still predominantly male. And that is, I think, part of the answer to why it would be difficult to get a book like that published. And it clearly is a very smart book, and it is clearly a book that is addressing something real. We all know that there is a lot of difficulty right now with raising boys into young men. You and I were discussing before we went on air the fact that there are people out there, I know several of them, who have sons in their 20s, 30s, and even 40s who have not left home. Some of them have jobs. Some of them don't work at all. And it is a struggle. What am I meant to do as a man in this society? Especially because, and this is true as well, because I've seen it and I've heard it, young women often still believe the old narrative of, you marry up, right? So if you've got a PhD, you're going to marry the brilliant, brain surgeon. Or if you make a certain rank in a military group, then you're going to marry the astronaut. It is really difficult for us to rewrite these stories. And that's part of why I think it's very interesting to discuss this in terms of literature and in terms of publishing and the stories that we tell, because part of this is finding a new narrative way forward for boys.
Although it's new in a way, but also it's very old. When Shadi Hamid leads his piece, Men Are Disappointing, this idea of disappointment is one of the most familiar themes, tropes in literature. I know one of the books that you select is by somebody else who's been on the show, Andrew Lipstein, a very talented youngish writer. His
Very
book,
talented.
Something Rotten. Is it about, I know this was a book that you enjoyed and selected to talk about today. Is this a book about the disappointing nature of men from the outside or from the inside?
I would say both. And I just want to quickly say, of course, you know that with the title Something Rotten, most of us know
Yeah,
just
even
enough
I know
Shakespeare
enough Shakespeare to know that.
to rock onto that, right? Something is rotten in the state of Denmark. So that's a cheeky way of saying we've got a couple named Reuben and Celia, and Celia, I'm sorry that I'm forgetting that, but I'll look it up, I promise. Anyway, Reuben has been working for a public radio station, and he's done something in a Zoom meeting. No spoilers, okay? But it has kind of led to a public humiliation.
We've had that one before.
And
I even had the original guy on the show. What's the CNN guy's name?
Yeah. Oh gosh, yes. Oh my gosh, I love that. Was so funny. But this is worse.
Oh,
this is worse.
I didn't know it could be worse than that one. But anyway, go on.
So one of the lines from the book is Reuben had become a victim as only a man could, refusing himself everything until his dignity had been returned intact. So Reuben is really, he cannot believe that his behavior could lead to disastrous consequences for his job. So he decides that when his wife wants to take an extended visit back to her family in Denmark, that he will go along as well as their infant son, Arne. And so they go to Denmark, and this is where Reuben is trying to learn how to reclaim his notions of his masculine identity. And I love the fact that Lipstein contrasts American and European notions of how to be a man. And Reuben, unfortunately, falls under the influence of someone who is kind of a trickster, okay? And it doesn't turn out well, but there are tons of discussions about, why can't I just go out and go on a bender, with my friends? That's what these men in Copenhagen are doing. They don't care. The women just put up with it. And meanwhile, you're getting chapters from the wife's perspective, and she's taking care of an old boyfriend who supposedly has a brain tumor. And so you're seeing her views
supposedly,
as well.
that makes me suspicious. Lipstein's wife is Danish, and he's of course American, so there's probably a little bit of playful autobiography here.
I think it's a little bit of a Romana clef, but also here's something else about Lipstein's novels. The Last Resort, The Vegan, and Something Rotten are all about young New York men who do something that, whether it's ethically or morally wrong, but they make a mistake and it threatens their foundations. And so in a way, he's written this trilogy of men hoisting themselves on their own petard, if you will. And I really enjoyed Something Rotten because of the contrast between men on the continent and their notions of how...
I'm not sure if you and I have discussed this. I'm always very, very suspicious, and I think I said this to Andrew when he came on the show. I'm always very suspicious of books or arguments or movies that suggest that we can learn anything from the Danes. Small little country, small irrelevant country in the middle of nowhere.
It's small, irrelevant. Listen, your country, your of origin, England, was under the Danelaw for how long?
We never learned that one in school. I think that's fake news. That's Danish propaganda.
What I do,
the only thing I remember about Denmark growing up in England was that they made good bacon, but maybe there's more to them than that. Now I think they make diet pills. But yeah, the Lipstein book is, and Lipstein's a very good interview. I mean, he's an example. My sense is, I mean, I've had him on the show a couple of times. He's a highly confident, articulate young man, or not some youngish man from Brooklyn who knows how to talk the talk, walk the walk, but at the same time has maintained a degree of confidence, perhaps even sort of, if not cynicism, sexual confidence to manage his own life. But that's just my take on him. Maybe I'm wrong.
Well, and before we get to the other nonfiction that I'm talking about, and maybe even some of the, the other media pieces that we're talking about, one thing I want to say is I decided to contrast Something Rotten with Taffy Brodesser-Akner's Long Island Compromise, which is one of my favorite books. Did it come out this year or last year?
You're asking me?
Says
You're the expert.
Yeah, it was a 2024 book. Her first one was Fleischman is in Trouble. That, of course, has been adapted.
That sounds like a Philip Roth title.
I know, it does sound like a Philip Roth title. And in a way, Brodesser-Akner is his female heir. She's writing about the world of Jewish people and families in the New York area. And of course, Long Island Compromise means, something that, there might be something a little hinky in there. And what happens in this book, which is a big, sprawling family saga, is that you open with a section. There's a brother in this family who is engaging in the craziest, it's I can't remember if it's a menage a trois or if there are more people involved.
Do they really do that in Long Island, Bethanne?
Yeah, no, he's in California,
we do
I
that all the
believe.
time out
And
here.
all the time in San Francisco. I know that's that's just the way things go in the Bay Area, Andrew. But it's a crazy raunchy opening to the book, and it in itself, this is one of the reasons I picked it. That is one reaction a man, a 40-something or 30-something man in this novel could have to the way masculinity is in the United States today. But then you go to Long Island, to where the very, very well-off mother and father of the clan live, and there are siblings who have chosen extremely different paths. I won't go further into the plot right now because we have so many other things to talk about. The important thing is the ending of Long Island Compromise is something that I believe is fundamental to what men need to know about themselves. And that is that there has to be some loyalty somewhere. There has to be some semblance of remembering where you came from. That seems to be
You mean a kind of respect
key.
for the past?
Yes. I thought Long Island Compromise was one of the best books of 2024. Not everyone will be able to get.
I mean, you've been on the show a lot. I don't think we ever discussed it last year, but
I'm not sure.
Taffy, she used to be. I know the name. Wasn't she involved with a media platform, a book conversation platform?
No doubt. I mean, Jessica Crispin was. She founded Book Slut, which was a great site. I'm sure Taffy was, and I'm sorry that I am just ignorant of it at the moment. So, but it's a really interesting book to look into for how men learn what's really important in their lives. And some men, like the paterfamilias in Long Island Compromise, didn't learn it well enough. That's as much of a spoiler as I'll give.
Don't spoil anymore. So the Brodesser-Akner book, Long Island Compromise, and the Lipstein book, they're both fiction. I want to come to some nonfiction in a minute, but I did in the beginning ask about a New York Times piece, or mention New York Times piece. Wondering where all the novel reading men have gone. Did men, you're my expert in all things literary, Bethanne, did men ever read novels?
Oh, absolutely. And I think they still do. Something that I tell people all the time is that my husband didn't read fiction by men or women for the longest time. And then a few years back, he took up reading audiobooks. And when I say reading audiobooks, yes, I know you listen to them, but they have found that listening to an audiobook reaches the same part of your brain as reading does. So anyway, 6 of 1. All of a sudden, instead of just reading big fat biographies about, famous generals and statesmen, my husband was reading novels and reading historical novels by women, reading all kinds of cozy mystery novels that he'd never tried before. And I swear it's because men have a lot of anxiety about people seeing what they're reading and people judging it. Men are so often judged on something being, feminine, or something being, we'll talk about this with one of the nonfiction books that I've selected as well. There is a lot of fatherly and, parental and societal shame around, whatever it is that men choose to spend their time on, which is really too bad. And I love now that I can see my husband's Audible selections are just all over the
Yeah,
place.
I'm not gonna ask the vulgar question of what kind of improvements you've seen in your husband's life, but has it made him less anxious? There was a very good piece in the New York Times on the modern love section by a man asking, where have all my deep male friendships gone? How much bound up do you think in this, shall we say, literary crisis of men, or men not reading books? Maybe the disappearance of literary men, whatever a literary man is, the Philip Roths of the book, not the Philip Roths of the book, the Philip Roths of the world. How much has it got to do with this broader crisis of anxiety and loneliness, which of course is also not just a male thing, but seems to have settled on the male condition somehow?
Well, let me say this, men do have a really tough time with friendships, and it is very, very difficult for men, I think, in lots of different groups to make and sustain friendships, especially in a world where increasingly in Gen Z and Generation Alpha, we're seeing people who aren't staying in one job or one place for as long as they used to. They're like, okay, I need to move on. I need to get this skill. I need to have this kind of experience, and so that gets, it breaks things up. You move, you lose friendships. But I also want to make the point, Andrew, that the books I've chosen are all by white people, and I was very intentional about that, because I think the idea of masculinity for men of color, particularly for African American men, has many more layers than we could get through in a single show. However, the important through line here is that we think the literary man is disappearing, but one of my favorite quotes from the articles that I sent along to you is from Constance Grady at Vox Media, who said, when it comes to prestige, the literary man appears to be thriving. He's just, crucially, less likely to also be straight and white than he used to be. And so I have a feeling that sometimes, not all the time, but some of the people writing these pieces or responding to them thinks that the literary male is Philip Roth or Norman Mailer or Richard
John
Russo,
Updike.
who just John Updike, but Russo just had his Bridge of Sighs picked up by Oprah, and that's pretty amazing. And I love Bridge of Sighs. I love Russo's work, but it is true that the literary male now might be more like Ocean Vuong or Kwame Alexander or Alexander Chi. It's a different world, and we're not going to find, as you said, the John Updikes and the Saul Bellows and
Bellow,
those sort of,
Updike. Roth, all notorious, highly controversial in terms of their relations, or too many relations with women. Let's move on to another book. This is an old one, but a good one, I know. The Descent of Man, great title, by Grayson Perry. Tell us about this book, why you still think it's relevant.
Well, it came out about a decade ago. I do think it's still relevant because many Americans don't know who Grayson Perry is. He's very well known in England. He's a celebrity, I think, there. And Perry was originally a ceramicist.
At least he's not Danish.
And I'd love to know if he's got Danish ancestry. So,
and by the way, I'm not sure what he looks like. Is that his photo on the cover of the book? I hope.
That's his photo. So here's the thing. Grayson Perry is wearing a suit and tie on the cover, or at least a jacket and tie.
And his hair is really bizarre. It looks like he's wearing a mop or something.
He always wears that little Dutch boy haircut, or a bob, if you will, because Perry has an alternate identity known as Claire. And Claire is a woman, or maybe a very large girl, and Claire wears circles of rouge on her cheeks and a lot of lipstick, and sometimes like little baby doll pajamas. So Perry does all this cheeky ceramics work, but also textile work. If you've never seen one of his art exhibits, they're stunning. They're very, very, they're almost like a mashup of the Women's Institute in Britain, right? Where women would, sell needle-pointed, altar kneelers, and then the Sex Pistols, if you will. So Grayson Perry is someone who doesn't mind shattering assumptions. Am I a man or a woman? I'm a man who lives as a woman sometimes. So one of his quotes is, well, most violent people, rapists, criminals, killers, tax avoiders, corrupt politicians, planet despoilers, sex abusers, and dinner party bores do tend to be, well, men. And so Perry says that it's not, the problem with men isn't their gender, it's their gender role that society dictates to them. And men live in a man's world, he says. They're unable to conceive of an alternative. And I love finding, I was looking at Dwight Garner's review of Perry's book, and he has just this great line. Homer Simpson once said to Marge, "What about my womanly needs?"
Yeah.
I thought it's so true. Women, men have had so much told them this is the only way to be, that they don't get enough of a chance to say, maybe I need a little time. Maybe I need some pampering. Maybe I need to look after someone or something. And it's just, Perry is, again, very cheeky, very off the cuff. This is not a perfect book. It's short. And he says, look, let's turn things around. Let's turn them on their head. Let's say that we can love, for instance, he does a lot of stuff with British traditions, including royalty and the royal family. You might pay homage to Queen Elizabeth II, but at the same time, see all the things that, she has done that are less than perfect. So Grayson Perry, not just in his life where he lives as a man and a woman, is able to hold two things in his head at the same time. And I think that's a really great reason to take a look at his book. But there's one, and you might be bringing it up next, I'm not sure, but that is The Man They Wanted Me to Be.
Yeah, and that was your last
Jared.
one. The Man They Wanted Me to Be, Toxic Masculinity and a Crisis of Our Own Making. Is this a book that blames the parents? I would expect we can blame a lot of the things you're implying, at least. We somehow blame the culture. It's gone wrong, which results in books like Grayson Perry's The Descent of Man. But one English poet, Philip Larkin, famously, I think in 1960, blamed the parents for everything. Is this a parent problem?
I love that. I love that's it. Blame the parents instead of reciting the lines. That's perfect, Andrew. That is a poem that I don't know, maybe not for everyone, but for me, definitely, goes through my head several times a year. But the interesting thing about Sexton's book is that he does talk about the fact that his father lived a shortened life. His father had severe diabetes, and he said, though, in the last decade of his life, his father completely changed. And maybe it was due to his seeing his own mortality. Maybe it was due to something he learned or heard. But at first, as you intuited, Sexton is brought up in a dirt poor family in Indiana. His father worked at a factory. His father was the prototypical man who left at the crack of dawn, came home, ate dinner. No one was allowed to bother him. He had a hair trigger temper. There was, there weren't enough resources to go around, whether it was food or clothing. And Sexton talks about his other relatives and other people in the town. And he talks about how incredibly alienated he felt from what he was expected to participate in. The explicit conversations about sex, the obsession with, hunting and fishing and trapping, the idea that, men ruled the roost in the household and no one else really mattered. And he knew that early on. And he had a really tough time separating from that and reconciling who he was. And it's not Jared Yates Sexton coming out of the closet. It's Jared Yates Sexton saying, this is a social construct. This isn't about sexual identity or orientation. This is about, the gender roles that were put on the people in my world, in my community. And like Jessa Crispin, Sexton says, this is a class issue. And what do we do? What do we do when once upon a time, the Democratic Party stood for the working class, and now the Democratic Party, such as it is, stands for the educated class, increasingly affluent educated class. How do we teach young men? How do we teach boys and young men to live honorable lives when people above them don't consider what they do honorable?
Although you haven't included one of these books, there are some conservative books in the J.D. Vance vein of things that suggest that the problem is that young men just need to learn to become traditional young men and learn to fish and hunt and fight and carry around guns, and that's what's going to make them happy, and that's healthy for society. Is there in your view, at least, a legitimate argument there?
No, not at all. Because as I just said, Jared Yates Sexton was completely alienated by
He may have been.
what was
I
going.
take that. I accept that, but not all young men would have been.
No, certainly, but that's the whole point. Some young men want to learn to hunt and fish. Some young men don't. And having the choice is what it's all about. And of course, that's what second and third wave feminism was about as well. And now, our feminism, I hope, has become much more intersectional. But for men, it's more difficult. They don't have the same kind of support. And what I mean by that, and I'll try to, gosh, this is tough stuff to untangle, right? Men have had the patriarchy and power to support them, but they don't have the community to support them. And that goes back to the crisis in male friendships that we talked about a few minutes ago. Men do not have the support systems that women and femmes and non-binary people have cultivated. And I'm really hoping that as we talk about this more openly, there is a crisis for men. That doesn't mean just because there is a crisis that we have to go back to the way things were for men.
Well, finally, Bethanne, this is the classic male question, which I always end with. Pick one. You can have one of these books that will somehow capture the crisis or maybe absence of crisis of men in 2025. Which of the books would you suggest people would read?
I would definitely say, please read Long Island Compromise, because that is a book that is going to make you think about lots of different kinds of men. And it is just, Something Rotten is delightful. I really enjoyed it. But Long Island Compromise, that's going to have some
Well, there's
staying
no
power.
compromise there. Bethanne Patrick chooses Long Island Compromise, a novel about the changing nature of male-female and particularly male relationships. As always, Bethanne, wonderful to have you on the show. I'm probably going to call this
You, Andrew.
interview Getting Queerer Quicker, but we'll have to see. Wonderful to see you. And we're going to do more of these shows, I think, as the year goes on, because it's always nice to build
Definitely.
shows with you around literary themes, new books. So many books are published. It's nice to build it around themes. So keep well, enjoy the rest of the summer, and we'll talk again in the not too
You
distant
too.
future. Thank you so much.
Thanks.